Myself and Gio have just finished recording this month's Mug of Tea over on our Patreon channel. And, well, we got a few questions left over, which have been given to us, issued to us, some might say, by our fine and fair patrons. So we're going to answer them now and make a little video with the hope of enticing you over to join Patreon. For those of you who don't know, Patreon is basically our third video channel. You get a whole host of additional videos over there, including a lot of perks, some discounts at our absolutely fantastic, amazing online store, which I think probably has the biggest selection of West Ham books anywhere in the whole West Ham universe.
Yeah, bar Amazon and Waterstones. Do you know, like the really good book places, apart from the good book places?
We're the best crap book place for West Ham books, basically. And what videos do we have on Patreon, Gio?
Oh, we got loads. Player ratings. Anton Ferdinand podcast. I did the latest one this week. He still wants Moyes gone, but he says the players need to start taking some responsibility, plus a whole host of other things. He talks for half an hour and pulls no punches. I quite like it. My opposition preview. We've got Hammerlytic, Patreon podcast. There's at least one video a day on Patreon every single day this week. Sometimes 2 videos, sometimes even 3.
Absolutely. We'd really appreciate your support. It helps Hammers Chat keep ticking along. Please check it out. The link's in the description below. It's patreon.com/Hammers Chat. 3 different tiers, hopefully one for every budget. Anyway, Gio, we got some questions today. What are they, mate?
Yeah, let's rock and roll. It's from James. He says, if we go down, do you think the narrative in most corners of the media will be to defend David Moyes and blame our relegation on other reasons, such as the fans? I ask because a West Ham fan, Simon, who's been on before, he had to go at Martin Keown and won, in my opinion. But anyway, Simon called up again and was asked, do you think you'll stay up? To which Simon replied, he said, absolutely 100% not. To which Simon Jordan responded with, well, not with bloody fans like you, it won't.
Well, I remember when Simon phoned up and spoke to Martin Keown, actually, and I pretty much remember what Martin Keown said, because Martin Keown was obviously famous for playing for Arsenal, but he also did play for Everton, and it was ahead of that crunch game, what would they call it, El Sacchio or El Sacchico or whatever it was, and it was Lampard was in place at Everton, of course. David Moyes had, I was going to say, still had the West Ham job. He still does, and he's likely to have it for some time to come. And Martin Keown very much said to Simon, well, basically, you're going to lose because of fans like you. And I absolutely hate it. And obviously, we didn't lose because this sort of feeds into, and it's not just a media narrative. We find this ourselves whenever we say anything sort of critical about anyone. Somebody say, just support the team. And I think it's a hell of a thing to assume, unless you've actually been to a game with somebody, to assume that they go there and they just moan. I mean, I'm pretty sure Simon goes to games. Pretty sure he sings Bubbles at the start. I'm pretty sure he cheers and he sings the old Frank Lampard song and other assorted tunes. So I don't think it's to do with that. In terms of us fans getting the blame for stuff, I think the media can only hide behind their narrative, as the description was, for so long. It's just not going to continue to wash. At some point, if they really want to go into it, and assuming we get relegated and there's going to be a proper autopsy about it, they're going to have to stop using these sort of vague overviews of everything. Oh, like he's just the guy you want. He's the main man. Who better than David Moyes to take a team from relegation places? And I think there's going to be hard to level it at the fans. I think at some point they're going to have to stop discussing Everton. They might actually have to discuss that he's taken Sunderland down. I think might have to actually discuss that there might have been, okay, mutiny's maybe a strong word, but it's good for clickbait reasons. But, there's certainly unsettled, as the players are unsettled and unhappy with David Moyes' tactics. The media are going to have to at some point deal with the fact that actually this has happened at Manchester United. This is not new for David Moyes to lose a dressing room, for players that are playing under him to say we don't agree with the way you're playing, we don't like the way you're playing, we don't like it, and we'd like to play in a totally different way. So at some point, the media have got to stop ignoring the bits that don't suit their narrative and start really dealing with the things that are probably happening. I do think there's going to. I think by and large, I think the board are going to escape criticism because they've invested so much money, and whether you think it's 180 or 200 million this season doesn't matter. Still an awful lot of money. It's still up there in the top sort of 3 clubs in the country for investment this season. So I think it's gonna be hard for it to go down. I know as fans we think that they should have pulled the trigger earlier. Not everybody, but I would gauging from the chat, Gio, and the comments, I think it's probably 80% of fans think that the trigger should have been pulled on Moyes earlier than it has been. It's going to be interesting to see where the blame lies. I think they're going to struggle to make it stick with the fans, though.
Yeah, I just want to quickly just back up what you said about how, the whole nut with fans like you kind of thing. I hate that attitude. It's like, I remember having it once. It was when we had Felipe Anderson. I put out a tweet. It was a negative opinion regarding Felipe Anderson, and somebody said, "Oh, why don't you just support him?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to turn up on Saturday and read out my tweet to him." I'm like, Felipe, I don't think Felipe Anderson has been good enough. I would like to see Manuel Lanzini start ahead of him. Yeah, have that, Felipe.
That's a terrible song, Gio, as well.
Yeah, no. Well, do you know something? I will turn up and sing this. Same as Sunday. If there was a song about David Moyes being Super David Moyes, would have joined in probably, because I'm there for that 90 minutes only. I'm there to support David Moyes. I'm there to support the 11 players on the football pitch, regardless of my views of that player. I think sometimes it can get taken a little too literal. It's just a song. When people say, "Oh, you're singing Super David Moyes," thought you didn't think he was super. I don't. It's a song. Just like I don't actually think Aaron Creswell wears a magic hat. I don't think he does. But I will sing the song. It's just you're supporting. You're there to support. And in regards to who they're going to blame, they'll blame David Moyes eventually. They will blame Moyes, but they'll do it without saying, "I was wrong about West Ham keeping Moyes. I was wrong to criticise Simon and any other fan that wanted Moyes sacked. I was wrong about that." They won't do that. They will just say, "Well, it's Moyes' fault." I agree with you. They won't blame the board because they'll say, "Well, they spent loads of money and they stuck by their manager. What more do you expect?" This was a manager that took him into European football 2 seasons on the bounce. Of course, the board should have stuck with David Moyes. Moyes should have had enough to get West Ham out of that. And they'll very much just blame David Moyes, but they'll do it without ever saying, "Okay, we were wrong to talk like that to West Ham." But they'll just ignore it as if that ever happened. They'll just pretend it didn't really happen and that they never poo-pooed West Ham fans' opinions for wanting rid of David Moyes. They'll just forget it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't bother us. But Moyes' fault. Moyes should be keeping that West Ham team in the Premier League, and I think they'll also point to European football as well and say it's because of the Conference League they struggled, and that's the reason. Obviously, as West Ham fans, we know that that's not the reason. That the form was prior to the season even starting to some extent, but that won't get picked up. It'll just be a case of, well, this is what happens when you play European football and you don't have a squad good enough or big enough for European football. Your league suffers and this happens. And here's a couple of case points. Oh, look at Burnley, 7th in the league, now playing in the Championship a couple of seasons later. But disregarding the fact that West Ham spent 180 million and Burnley didn't. So yeah, I think they'll blame Moyes eventually, but I do think we have to get relegated in order for them to blame Dave Moyes. And I think there'll be a lot of finger pointing at certain players as well. Say, well, he didn't turn up. Look at that return from Maxwell Cornet. Where was he for this season, kind of thing? So yeah, I think they'll blame loads of things, but the one thing they won't do is just hold their hands up and say we were wrong to sort of criticise West Ham fans for having an opinion that we didn't agree with at the time. Which I always think is wild. I always think it's wild. If I had an opinion on, let's just say we're playing Aston Villa this weekend, if I had an opinion on Unai Emery and a Villa fan came along and said to me, "You're wrong, this is what's actually happened," do you know something? I would probably go, "Okay, fair enough," because you know a lot more than I do. And I think actually they could learn a lot by listening to the fans rather than just disregarding them because they're only fans. I think it's a very strange thing to do. Anyway,
well, actually, before I just want to get your clarification because you said you don't believe the literal meaning of songs. There, does that mean that you don't believe that Frank Lampard weighs so much that 10 men couldn't carry him?
I don't know. Depends what he's ate the night before. Also, how big are these men? 10 of you, no chance.
There you go.
You won't even go outside in the snow.
This is true. Not to get a chocolate bar, no.
We've also got a question from Ethan, which we've kind of touched upon before, but we'll do it again because Ethan's kind enough to ask a question. So it doesn't worry you that our board will most likely not get in a more attacking style of manager, despite this clearly being what the players need, and instead go with a manager who's a bit defensive, which clearly does not suit these players and has been failing all season.
I think it worries me in broader terms than that, I got to say, I don't think they're not getting somebody in because that person they might be looking to bring in is more attacking. I don't think they're keeping David Moyes because he's defensive. I just think it's an overview of. I just think their head is stuck in the sand. I'm not even. I would love to think that actually there's even a decision-making process there. That actually they're maybe looking, whoever the case may be, but Michael Carrick or company or Will Still or whoever your favourite might be for the job, and thinking, oh, he can do a job. He's tactically different to the manager we got. I'm not even sure they recognise it. I'm not even sure they even know. I doubt they. I wouldn't even. It wouldn't even put it past them not to know that Michael Carrick was in charge at Middlesbrough. That's the sort of level of incompetence I think we're dealing with here, because there's no way that anybody looking at the stats could not see how bad we've been over the past 12 months. So you have to also assume, but if you take that thought process further, that if they're looking at the stats and they're aware of the stats, they're aware that David Moyes is doing badly. You want to factor that into that they've got 700 million reasons to make sure that West Ham retain their Premier League status. It just, none of it makes any sense. The only thing I can think is if they're not looking at this stuff, they don't attacking, not attacking, they don't care. They're just sat there frozen, literally paralyzed with fear and hoping for the best and believing. We go back to the start of the video, these well-worn cliches that are peddled out by the media, that David Moyes is the best man for the job. And I think that's all that's going on there. I just don't think that there's, I'd love to think they looked at it and think, do you know what? Maybe there is a manager out there who could get the best out of our Italian striker, out of our Brazilian playmaker. I don't even think they're thinking, and it's sad. I don't even think they're thinking it in those sort of depths.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they do that either. I don't think they look at a manager to work with the squad available, because when you look at the previous appointments up to and including David Moyes, you've gone from Sam Allardyce to Slaven Bilic, two completely different styles of play, to David Moyes, a completely different style of play, to Sam Allardyce, to Manuel Pellegrini, another completely different style of manager, back to David Moyes, which we've already established a different style altogether. And you have a little bit of everybody's squad. So the overall squad's got some from Allardyce, some from Slav, some from Moyes, and some from Pellegrini. It's an absolute mess of a squad for Moyes to start with, really, because it's sort of like, hang on, he's brought in under him, and I'm supposed to use them, kind of thing. And this is where it's just absolutely bonkers that when you look at Brighton, they've gone and identified De Zerbi and thought, well, he can use the squad we've got. He feeds into the culture of the club, but also the identity of what we want to see on the pitch. That's the guy, and he's the best at using that type of squad. Let's go get him. Whereas we don't think like that. We do the opposite, which is, well, let's start with who's available.
Yeah.
Whereas other teams like Brighton start with who's the best, and then we'll work out if they're available or not, kind of thing. And if not, we'll make them available. Like Aston Villa, who do you want? Unai Emery, but he's got a job. I don't care. Go get him. Whereas we rule that out straight away. So, well, he's got to, and I don't even think they've taken identity into consideration, because to do so, you've got to have an identity already, and we don't have that. So our identity on the pitch relies on the manager creating it at the time, and it will change from manager to manager. There's no continuity whatsoever between Allardyce through to David Moyes present. There's none. Everything's changed. Everything changes, and that's why there's very few players still here. There's one or two. We've got Creswell, which is fine. He's a really good Premier League left back, or has been for the majority of that time. We've got Ogbon has been here for a while now. Again, fine. But apart from that, there's nobody. There's nobody else. Michail Antonio came in under Slaven Bilic as well. So there's nothing, there's no continuity whatsoever in that playing team. And I'm not surprised, because the identity is made up as we go. So when it comes to recruiting a manager, they don't look at the squad and think who's the best one to work with this lot. No. They look at the league table and think who's the best one to keep us 17th at worst. And at the minute, they're looking at David Moyes and they're looking at the league table thinking, well, we're not in the bottom three, so we'll stick with what we got. And what concerns me is, when you did the video earlier in the week, the 4 reasons as to why the board is sticking with David Moyes, and I didn't know what they were. I hadn't seen what you've seen, so I was listening as you read them out and whatever. And I was generally not shocked, but more laughing at the fact that not one of those 4 reasons were Moyes is the right man for the job.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was, oh, money. Oh, well, blah, blah. It was all reasons as to why not to change a manager, but not one of them was about David Moyes' ability. And I just thought it was absolutely shocking, because if you were to go to any club and say, why is he your manager? And they say, because he's the right manager for this football club. But with us, it's like, well, we don't really know who else there is. Doesn't mean he's the right manager. It's absolutely ludicrous that your reason for keeping the manager is because you don't know who else there is. It is absolutely bonkers, because to think like that means you've already decided he's not really doing a good enough job. So why don't you get rid of him? Don't know.
I've got a theory on this before we finish up. And that is because I don't think there's a cohesive plan for the team. I don't think there's a strategy, an overriding strategy. I think there is for the club. So I think the club, there's a targeted strategy for the club, so they know where they see the club in 5 years' time. They know where they see the club in 10 years' time, regardless of whether they own it or whether they don't. They want to get to this point where they want to sell it, then it has to be in this particular position. They get to the point they want to keep it, it has to be in this particular position. But everything is club focused, everything is brand focused, everything is along those lines. And so I think there's a corporate strategy. There's no strategy for the team. If you were to ask them, where do you want this club to be? Where do you want negotiations for the stadium to be in 4 years? You'd get an answer. Where do you want the club to be in terms of revenue, in terms of turnover? You'd get an answer. For you to ask them, where do you think the team, and I mean the player in terms of the manager, the style, where do you want the team to be in 4 years' time? They wouldn't have a clue. They don't care, because it's a byproduct. It's just not part of what's going on.
Their answer would be 17th at worst. It is, isn't it? There's a lot of West Ham fans always had this theory that since they arrived at the club, they had one plan: buy it, get us to the Olympic Stadium, tread water, keep us in the Premier League, do the bare minimum, keep us in the Premier League, and then cash in. And bearing in mind the clause ends in the next couple of weeks, if somebody makes a 12-year prediction and you get to 11 and a half years in, I'd suggest your prediction's got a little bit of merit to it. It's a long prediction to make. We're still here. Now, for that prediction to come true, of course, they're going to have to sell the club in the next 15 months, I think, and for a substantial profit. And if they do, those people who predicted this, when they rocked up at the club, you can turn around and say, you were bang on. You were absolutely bang on. Up until now, their theory is still more than on. And if we stay in the Premier League, I would suggest they're probably going to be proven correct. And I agree with you. Their plan all along has been just keep us in the Premier League. Let's get rid of this clause, and then we can cash in and go somewhere else if they wish to. We'll find out if that's true or not. But I agree with you. That means, in terms of the team, there's not really a plan, and I don't think there's any desire to either. They've tried to do what they had to do and get a little bit lucky along the way. And in the last 2 years, they've got a bit lucky, because there's no genius process of David Sullivan recruiting David Moyes again. David Sullivan got incredibly lucky going back to David Moyes and getting him, and we went into European football 2 years unbound. It was down to pure luck. That was not a really good appointment. It was not a sought-out appointment. And David Sullivan did not hire David Moyes a second time going, he's going to get us to Europe. There was none of that. It was luck, and it's down to David Moyes, not David Sullivan. It was luck. So yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. They say never go back, because never go back 3 times. Anyway, there you have it. If somehow you've enjoyed this miserable ass video, then please do stick a thumbs up on it. If you're not subscribed, please do so. And if while you're looking at that little lovely subscribe button next to it, there's a bell. You press that. You'll get annoyed by us every time we upload a video. If you'd like to hear all the other questions that we discussed, please go and check out our Patreon channel. That's patreon.com/Hammers Chat. Really is a fantastic way where you could support us. Gio, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.